Welcome to the Story A Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy from storyaday.org, encouraging you to be a writer every day, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie from Story A Day here. This week, I want to dive right into a craft issue that I've been thinking a lot about. We just wrapped up the Story A Day critique week, and as always, when I'm doing critique, often of first-ish drafts, one of the things that a lot of us do is we write in a very summary, narrative kind of way. We tell the story as if we were writing a news story. We're getting the plot down. We're telling you what happened, all the pieces. There's lots of backstory creeping in. You know, when I was young, I saw this, and the reason that I'm doing this is such and such, which is all fine. There needs to be backstory. We need to know why to care about your characters. But I always find myself writing this piece of critique somewhere in the story. I want to know more about this moment. I want you to linger in this moment longer. I want to feel like I'm there. And it feels like a kind of, it's a true response to a lot of things that I read that are in that early draft, but it's not an awfully helpful piece of feedback. So I decided to dig deeper into it and figure out what it was that I was really looking for. And I realized that what I'm really looking for is that sense of being in the scene with the character. Now, not every piece of your story needs to be like that. In fact, if every piece of your story was like that, we would be confused and bored. It would be like that person who, can't tell a good story because they don't know what parts to emphasize. And they'll talk to you as much about their thought process while they were trying to find a parking space as they will about the fact that a dragon leapt out off the roof of the supermarket and torched the car after they parked it. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? Because they haven't focused you on the important part of the story. So I think that's why that's the feedback that I'm giving sometimes is I want you to linger in this moment because I sense that this might be the most important moment in the story. The good news is that if I'm writing that and if I'm sensing that, but I'm just not satisfied with how it's looking on the page, then the good news is that the writer has somehow communicated to me the story question. They've communicated to me who's the most important character. They've communicated what the theme of the story is. They've given me signposts to see what's the most emotionally resonant or plot important piece. So that's all good. The fact that I'm still dissatisfied could be called a problem of pacing. But what does that mean? It could be called a matter of telling, not showing. But what does that mean? These are all tools of the writing trade that we talk about without defining often enough. I'm putting together a workshop at the moment, thinking about this stuff and trying to figure out some techniques to illustrate what I'm trying to get to and for how to correct it. And I think the difference is the kind of writing that we do. There's two different types of writing in a story. That summary or narrative style where you're just telling somebody what happens. That's great for transitions, for introductions, for moving the story along between scenes, for telling us that time has passed. But it keeps us at arm's length. It doesn't make us feel like when you're reading a news report in a newspaper like you do every morning because you live in the 1970s, you rarely feel pulled into that story. I think that's why that new journalism came along in the 60s where everybody was writing, as if they were writing novels when they went to interview someone and they described the gravel crunching as they walk up to the door of the place where the reclusive author lives that they're about to go into interview. But that kind of reporting can be useful for saying, 3 years later, we went back to the same house. It doesn't pull you into the moment. So I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. And first of all, I want to read you a quote from David Farland, who wrote the book $1 Million Outlines. And he says, explaining this concept of, putting too much backstory or narrative into your story is ineffective because he says, what happens in the past, off screen, good or bad, does not affect sympathy. It's what we see the characters do in the present that determines how much we will or will not care about that character. So there's two parts of that I think are really important. Is what we see the characters do, and I would argue what we feel the characters do. So the real-time stuff, he's talking partly about screenplays, so that's why he's using the word see. When we're talking about written fiction, I think we need to be inside their heads. We need to be looking through their eyes rather than seeing them. But what we see and feel and experience with the characters in the present. And I think that means we don't want the characters to tell us about what they did earlier. We want them to let us live the moments with them in real time. That doesn't mean you need to write everything in present tense, but it means we experience it as they're going through it with them. So I pulled up an example from the current collection of the Best American Short Stories, which has just came out in October and is available everywhere. So this story by Brandon Hobson is called Escape from the Dysphasiac People. I picked one with a word I didn't know how to pronounce. Excellent. And it was originally published in McSweeney's. And it starts with an older man telling a story of his life. So I was nervous. When I read the opening, it starts, "Beloved grandchildren, Dr. Estep has recommended I tell the story of how many years ago I escaped from the darkening lands and returned home." So I was kind of like, oh, great. This is going to be a story that's, all at arm's length. He's telling me a story. Now, obviously, I didn't think it would get into this collection if it didn't have something more to offer than that. But, I was a little nervous when I read that. So it starts, after that sentence, he continues, "I escaped from the men who talked funny, the ones who removed me from my home and cut my hair and put me on a train. I expected it would happen. They had already taken all my friends from school. It occurred late one night in September." Now, that's intriguing. It's a horrifying concept. We kind of know from the language and from the things that are happening who this person is. And so it's informed with context. We know this is probably a Native American person, an Indigenous person. We know what they're talking about. So we're horrified, but we're not really horrified by the story. We're horrified intellectually, but I'm not horrified yet. I'm like, oh, they took him from his home and cut his hair and put him on a train. That's terrible. But I'm not feeling it. So he tells us some backstory, and then a page or so later, we talk about, he shifts from telling the story to taking us into the story. "When I awoke, I was on a train heading to the darkening land." And he says, "Outside the world flew by. I wasn't able to see anything except fog. In the windows, I noticed my smoky reflection. I leaned against the cold glass and tried to sleep. A man a few rows in front of me stood from his seat. His spine was so badly crooked, he was bent forward, craning his neck to look back at me. He was coughing dust and smoke. I could barely understand what was going on with the people on the train. Another older man and his wife were in the seats across from me. The man's face sagged from his skull. He blew his nose into a handkerchief. I don't feel well, he told his wife." So we don't really know what's going on here. And I think it's pretty effective because we're going through this experience with the character. We are seeing what he's seeing. We're experiencing the frightening confusion, the disjointed images, the sense of not having a clue what's going on, the very fog, which means you can't see anything outside this immediate experience. We're not getting any beloved, I'm telling you this story. We're not getting any commentary about the doctor or the aunt or any of the other backstory that we've heard up to this point. We're just getting the experiences of the character through their eyes in real time as they're experiencing it. So when I talk about the difference between scenic writing and narrative writing, it's not that you need to be writing more description. It's not that you need to be writing the present tense. There's no one way to do this correctly, but it is something to be watching out for in your own writing. When do you want to be writing in that kind of immediate, immersive way? And when do you want to be filling us in on backstory or transitions? Broadly speaking, if it's important, resonant emotionally, or if it's important to the plot, you might want to pause and plunge us into that moment a bit by putting us in the character's eyes. Whether you're writing first person or third, you can still show us everything through the character's eyes. You might want to show us everything that happens, even if it is just the character getting up to make a cup of tea. Show us every action and make the actions reflect their emotions. You know this stuff, right? You know this stuff works because you're a reader, because you're a writer. I'm just pointing out things that you know in a very, very explicit way so that you can watch yourself. And as you read through things that you've written, you can find the places where you are skimming over the important stuff, zipping right, yada-yadaing the good part if you're a Seinfeld fan. You need to pause, linger in the good parts. And I'm running a workshop on this coming Monday. If you're listening to this in real time, you can still sign up. Otherwise, there might be a replay at some point. But I'm gonna take people into this. We're going to talk about some flags for spotting when you're writing in summary instead of scenes. We're going to look at some examples from a classic short story and look at the proportion of each type of writing in that story. We're going to sit and write. You're going to get to work on your own writing and maybe share it. One of the things to be aware of when we talk about techniques like this is it can be a little overwhelming and it can stop you in your tracks when you're drafting a new story. And so before I move on and let you go back into your writing day, I want to say, if you've just spotted that this is something that you do too much narrative, not enough scene making, just be aware of it just now, because you can stall yourself and not write anything because you're not writing it correctly, or you can write the way you write and fix it later. And the more often you go back and fix something like this, the easier it becomes for you to write it differently in future. So at some point, when you've corrected your use of the passive voice, you will find yourself, when you've done it often enough, you will find yourself automatically not doing it in the first draft. But you don't have to fix this all at once, right? If you find yourself writing everything as if you were telling a story to somebody over a cup of coffee rather than writing an immersive piece of fiction, just notice it. Let yourself tell the story that however it comes out. Go back in and fix it. And after you've done that 5, 6, 10 times, the next time you write a first draft, you'll notice yourself doing it and you'll know how to not do it because you've corrected it before. You'll be like, oh, wait, I need to write this scene much more immersively. And then you'll do it. So never worry when you learn or explore a piece of the writing craft and notice that you aren't doing it optimally yet. The fact that you're noticing it, the fact that you're paying attention to it, is the only thing that matters. Actually, it's not the only thing that matters. The thing that matters is that you act on that knowledge, but you don't have to get it right the first time. We have erasers, we have backspace keys, we have fresh sheets of paper that we can rewrite things in. If you make a mistake, the reward is that you get to do more writing. Yay! Okay, that's what I have for you today. I'm not going to talk any longer because it is NaNoWriMo month as I talk, and I know you've got lots to do. Even if you're not writing a novel this NaNoWriMo, I'm sure you're feeling the energy from in the charge in the writing community, and you're feeling the urge to write. So I'm going to let you go and do that. I'll be back after this short break, and I will be back with a writing prompt for you in case you are needing something to get you going. If you are writing a NaNoWriMo novel, good luck. We are coming into the end of the first week. I'm going to recommend that even if you haven't done all your setup for your story yet, write a transition, write a turning point that gets your character into the action, have them move into the big middle section of your novel now. This week, start writing towards your midpoint. Let your characters have some fun, let them make some mistakes, let them meet some interesting people. This is a great week. This is the second quarter of your novel, is the fun part where you just get to explore and open drawers and root around in them and look at all the possibilities. Keep writing, and I wish you much joy of the writing process and many closed doors and free minutes. If you want to learn to write, don't read another book or article. Start writing. I'm here to invite you to consider the Story a Day 3-Day Challenge. It's a challenge and a workshop that gets people writing and completing stories in just 3 days, and it works. I'm fanatical about getting more and more diverse stories into the world, and I think yours should be among them. If you're feeling the pull to write or level up your storytelling, let me hold your hand through 3 days of short story writing. Check out the 3-Day Challenge at storyaday.org/3DC. In this writing prompt, I want you to take us into a moment that's emotionally resonant or important for the plot for your character. You can write a whole story leading up to this moment. You can start your story here and show us the fallout, but I want you to really focus on the important moment in your story. You can use the Story a Day short story formula to brainstorm a story for yourself, get yourself an interesting character, give them a desire, and then think about the bits in the middle that actually are the action. I suggest that for this prompt you fire up Google Maps or some other kind of immersive map making program. Plonk yourself down in a place in the real world that is interesting to you. It could be a piazza in Italy, it could be a small town in the Cotswolds, it could be a forest somewhere. Depending on your genre, you're going to pick different things. If you're writing, fantasy, you might pick the forest. If you're writing science fiction, you might want to pick a very modern city. But plonk yourself down in there, do street view, and look around. Use that as the setting for your story and have your character walking through that setting so that whatever is happening in real time and they've got stuff to look at, stuff to interact with, people to bump into, cars to avoid, whatever you need to get some action into this scene that's important and that you're telling in real time, so that you pull the reader into the experience with them. You can weave in a little bit of backstory here and there, have some transitions, 15 minutes later I entered the cafe, that kind of thing. But I want I want you to focus on telling the most important part of the story in a very immersive way. Have action, have dialogue, a little bit of description and interaction with their surroundings so that it feels real, and just play with this idea of mixing scenic writing and narrative or summary seasoning. Not everything, if your story has more than one scene, not the 100% of the story isn't going to be this scenic writing. But I want you to focus on that today. I would rather you overdo the scenic writing today and then you can cut it back later, because that's what I want you to practice today. Have fun writing this. Have fun doing your digital exploration of the world. Don't spend too much time on it. And let me know how you got on by sending me a comment. Keep writing. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week and of course, keep writing.